Since I'm stuck indoors because it's been raining and even hailing off and on today, so I can't work in the garden, I decided this was a good time to record some videos I've been thinking about doing for some time. In this video, I want to tell about how I got involved in herbs, which is a very unusual story and actually has to do with a series of spiritual experiences I've had that include warnings about problems that we may face in the near future. So I'm going to warn you up front that what I'm going to talk about is rather controversial, and I've actually shared this story with a few people before, but I've never really publicly put out my experiences, so it's kind of a little bit scary to do, but I think it's important because I feel like it's an important message that I'd like people to consider. Now, my interest in herbs began actually when I was a Boy Scout. I was working to get my Nature Merit Badge, which was the last merit badge I needed to become an Eagle Scout. And you could study birds or mammals or reptiles or rocks and soils and plants, and I decided to study rocks and soils and plants because they didn't run away while you tried to look them up in a field guide. But one of the books I had that helped me learn about plants was filled with very interesting information about how Native Americans had used plants for medicine, for food, for fiber, and so forth. And I became very fascinated with this. And so after I had been studying this for a little while, shortly before I turned 16, I was on a camping trip in the mountains just outside of Salt Lake, Mill B North Fork of the Big Cottonwood Canyon, one of my favorite places on the planet. And we had run into a patch of stinging nettle, simply because one of the fellow scouts had gotten stung by it. So I decided to take a little revenge on the plant and try out the fact that I had read that stinging nettle was edible after boiling in 2 changes of water. It's actually edible after boiling it in 1 change of water, but anyway, I boiled it twice in 2 changes of water and ate it, and it was very much like spinach and beet greens and actually quite yummy. So I was rather pleased with myself because here I am, 15 years old, and I just had harvested on my own, identified and harvested on my own, and eaten a wild plant. And I'd never done anything like that before. So I was sitting on a hilltop above where we were camped, and I was looking around me at the different plants that I could spot from where I was sitting and thinking, oh, they use that one for dye, and they use that one for medicine, and they use that one to make fishing line, and they ate that one. And as I was looking around thinking all these amazing plants that were around me that had been utilized by native peoples, I heard a little voice. Not a voice audible to my ears, but a voice from in my heart that spoke through the center of me that said, well, if you were a loving God, wouldn't you have put everything naturally upon the face of the earth to take care of your children? And that thought that occurred from deep within me got me thinking, and I got to think about all of the people who had lived on the earth who, before modern medicine came on board, and I thought about all the people who still lived on the earth that didn't have access to modern medicine, and I thought, well, if there was this all-powerful creator and he knew what diseases mankind would be afflicted with, would he make it so that nobody had any way to treat any disease until the discovery of modern science and modern medicine, and just let people perish? Or would he have provided remedies that people could use that would be just readily available in the environment to take care of the diseases that they were prone to? And I came to the conclusion that the Creator must have provided a remedy for every affliction that mankind experienced that would be naturally growing upon the face of the earth, that would be basically for free if you knew how to find it or harvest it. And no sooner had I thought that, and that was part of what propelled me into herbal medicine. But no sooner had I thought, that there must be a remedy for everything, then that little voice spoke to me again and said, "That is correct." In other words, yes, you're right. There is a remedy naturally upon the face of the earth that's available, quote, for free, if you know how to use it, okay, for every affliction that mankind suffers from. And then it said, "And what will you do when the lights go out?" Now, at that point, I experienced a very interesting phenomenon, which I can only describe as vision, because a series of images flashed across the surface of my mind like watching a movie, and they went boom, 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 boom in rapid succession. And I saw a time when the power grid had collapsed, when the petrochemical industry had basically collapsed, when there were not pharmaceutical drugs available to people. And I remember distinctly seeing an image of a doctor standing next to this machine that was used for diagnosis that didn't work. And at the time I thought it must be some kind of an X-ray machine, but it was a big tube, okay, that had a bed that slid into it. And in retrospect, later I realized I was seeing an MRI machine before it was developed. In other words, before this had been invented, I actually saw this machine that is now used in modern medicine, which was very interesting. And I realized, that we had this dependence on this modern medical technology, that if it failed, we'd be in big trouble. And so those two things propelled me into a study of plants. It was so vivid and so compelling to me that, as a young man, thereafter, every chance I could get out in the woods, I was out there, and other kids were, playing and goofing off and doing things, and I was sitting there with field guides trying to identify and learn about edible and medicinal wild plants, because I was wanting to know where these remedies were that God had prepared, and I was thinking in terms of, learning these things so that if the thing I had foreseen of like the collapse of the medical technology, I'd know what to do. I'd know how to help people. That was what was driving me, and it drove me for years to spend lots and lots of time. And this was before I learned about the herb community. This was before I read any books on herbal medicine. All of this, I was out there trying to learn this from the standpoint of learning, survival skills, basically what I was talking about. Well, when I turned 19, I went on a mission for my church to Southern California, and I was in Southern California for 2 years. And towards the end of my mission, I was one evening up on a hill above the area of Tustin in Orange County, and it was a beautiful, beautiful, clear day. There was no smog, there was no pollution. There had been some recent rains, and so all the smog was gone. And all I could see in front of me was this sea of light stretching from one end of the coast on over towards Los Angeles, this huge, huge sea of lights. And as I was looking out on that, my mind opened up again and again. It was a similar kind of thing to what I experienced before, what I would call a vision, except it was this series of images. I saw the distant farms where food was being grown, and the factories where it was processed, and how it was trucked in and put on the store shelves. And I saw the dams and everything in Northern California, and the California aqueduct bringing water to Southern California, and the reservoir system and the pumps that pump that water over the mountains to supply water for that. And I saw the gas mains and the power lines from the distant power plants bringing electricity in. It was like, in my mind, I was viewing this entire greater LA area like it was some living organism that had arteries and veins and nerves and all these things that supplied it and kept it alive. And it was really just amazing. I was just like, it was kind of like a wondrous thing to contemplate everything that was necessary to keep that going and to allow all those people to live there. And as my mind was taking all of this in the image that I was seeing in my mind, a giant hand came down out of a cloud in the sky with a big pair of scissors and cut the power lines. And it was like, my eyes are still open and I'm still looking out over this sea of vast lights, but in my mind's eye it was like that whole place went dark. Everything went pitch black. And after it went pitch black, suddenly it started to illuminate again, but this time it was illuminated with fires. And I saw, again, a series of images across my mind of people looting, rioting, pillaging, killing each other for food, etc. And it was really quite terrifying. And literally I watched them destroy each other, and that great area just burned to the ground as people killed and looted and plundered each other. And it was a very, very sobering thought, and again left an incredible impression on me about how fragile the technological society that we depend on really is. How easily something could disrupt it, break down the flow of all those goods and services that keep people alive, and cause widespread calamities. And this was particularly coming on the top of a very interesting experience, a couple of very interesting experiences. One was a young girl that we had been teaching, whose mother told us that when she went to a dairy and saw that milk came out of a cow, that it came out of an animal, she stopped drinking it. And I kind of got the idea of how disconnected people are from the reality of nature, because I had spent so much time in nature and studying survival and studying Native American lore and everything else like that, and I'd always loved to garden and be close to nature. I realized that the vast majority of people living in major metropolitan areas are really disconnected from nature. They have no idea how to grow any food. They don't know how to repair a piece of clothing. They don't know how to build a shelter. They don't know anything. Maybe all they know is how to sit in front of a computer and do computer programming or some other job that's totally a part of this technological system. And when that technological system failed them, what would they do? They wouldn't know how to treat a cold. They wouldn't know how to do anything. And that was also very sobering. The other thing was had a neighbor who had some problems. Her steak caught fire in the broiler, and she didn't have a can opener and couldn't open the can. And when I tried to give her a little roll can opener, she couldn't use it because the only thing she knew how to do was an electric can opener. And I actually had this vision of people starving to death with canned foods around because they had no can opener, no electric can opener. I think that it was all this that propelled me afterwards. Even though I majored in communications, I was still avidly interested in survival and emergency preparedness. And what's also interesting is at this time, after my first experience, I had not ever gotten the idea that the herbal medicines that I was studying could help me with my own health problems. I still believed in modern medicine. And I had a lot of health problems growing up. I was very sick. I had chronic sinus problems. I caught every cold and whatever that went along. It took me forever to recover. I was constantly given antibiotics and so forth. And in the first part of my mission in Southern California, because I had sinus problems, I was sick for nearly the first 6 months. And it was at that point that I got an idea that maybe these herbal medicines that I'd been studying, maybe this natural way of doing things might actually be better than modern medicine. Because up until that time, I was only considering it from the standpoint of something I could use if modern health medicine disappeared. Because I still thought of modern medicine as the epitome of healing, and all this other stuff is sort of primitive. And so when I got that thought, I actually started trying some herbal teas. I changed my diet. I started going to a chiropractor. And lo and behold, for the first time in my life, I started to get well. And that was a major shift in consciousness where I began to think that maybe this was a superior way of treating illness than modern medicine. That maybe the creator, when he made the herbs, made medicines that were perfect for our bodies in the first place, and that our attempts to tamper and create all these chemicals were actually creating medicines that were inferior, that did not work as well as the herbs did. And that idea has been borne out with me for the decades that I've been involved in herbal medicine, that for the most part, I think that herbal medicines are safer and actually create healing, whereas the drugs don't. Now, even if you don't believe, like I do, that there is a creator or that there is a God, still, if you look at it from the idea of evolution, it makes sense that the plants and animals and things that would have evolved along with us would be naturally compatible with our health and our bodies, and more so than isolated chemical substances that we've only developed in the last 100, 150 years is where this whole chemical medicine started coming in. So I think that we have a, it's just an interesting thing to contemplate. So I became an avid reader of the Mother Earth news. I was really interested in Back to Nature. I studied all kinds of skills that you would be able to use to help you if society broke down in some way or another. And there are a lot of people who look at that and go, that's really negative, that's really pessimistic and everything. But if you look at history, every great civilization has at some point eventually collapsed. If you look even at the devastation that took place in World War II in Europe, with the bombing and all the things that happened, and people were left destitute and homeless and so forth, what would the knowledge of how to use plants for food and medicine or whatever in your local, the knowledge of how to have skills that allow you to survive somewhat outside of a technological culture, what would be that value? I mean, the idea of preparedness, even for natural disasters that have occurred in the United States, where it takes weeks for government officials to come in and start, really helping people out. So the skills are still pragmatic, even if there isn't some kind of wide scale breakdown like I saw. But the biggest point I want to make at this video, I needed to lay out those early experiences, which, by the way, are not the only spiritual impressions I've had about things that are coming in the future, and I'll probably talk more about some of that in some later videos. But I want to talk about what happened right after the year 2000, when Y2K came and went. And I had been doing emergency preparedness and studying all this stuff for years and years and years, and I was starting to feel like, the economy is good, maybe I'm an idiot, maybe I should have spent more time making money and acquiring savings accounts and being more practical and so forth. And I was just kind of going, maybe I'm just wrong. And then one morning, something really interesting happened to me. I woke up in the morning and I suddenly resaw both of the original experiences that I had that had gotten me interested in herbal medicine and all of this, kind of back to nature, back to a simpler lifestyle, more self-sufficient lifestyle mentality. Anyway, I saw them again, just like I'd seen them the first time. Boom, 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 those images and the reminder. And I saw another set of images which were about things I had done, as a result of that skills I'd learned, like canning and gardening and knowing how to do primitive shelters and a lot of other things like that. And that little voice spoke to me again, and it said, "Today marks the beginning of the period of time in history that I warned you about." from this day forward, all of those things that you have studied and learned are going to become increasingly important and increasingly valuable. And no sooner had that little voice spoken to me and told me that again, than the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and it was my girlfriend at the time, and she was saying, turn on the TV, blah, 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 babbling this stuff about a plane, blah, blah, and I was like, what? So I went and I turned on the TV, and I no sooner turned on the TV than I saw that really famous image of the plane going into the Twin Towers. And that little voice said, welcome to the Pearl Harbor of World War III. So since that time, I have watched what's been going on in our country, what's been going on in the world, and I have steadily watched what I was thinking was this great time of prosperity start to unwind. And I've started to see our freedoms curtailed. I've started to see just a lot of things that make me concerned. And I'm particularly right now feeling very strongly that we're on the verge of a major economic collapse. The amount of debt that not just our government, but every government in the world has taken on. And I've studied the issues of economics and whatever enough to know that the system we're living under, an economic system, is unsustainable. At some point, it's bubbled up to the point where it's going to have to undergo a major adjustment, because most of the quote-unquote money in circulation is just numbers in computers that doesn't even exist. And at some point, that system, credit-based economy system, is just going to implode. Now, and this will be probably worse than what happened in the Great Depression. But there's a couple of issues here that make this worse than what happened in the Great Depression. Because as I look around me, I see how divided the country is. And I see the number of people who have no skills at all. They're completely dependent, not even on their own labor, but on entitlement programs and so forth, from the government. And the whole entitlement mentality that someone else should take care of me, rather than the self-reliant mentality that I've been working for since in my teens when I first encountered these experiences. And I'm very concerned about the amount of civil unrest that will take place, and the declaration of martial law, and the shortage of goods, and the many disruptions that we're going to have to our way of life when this event happens. And so I wanted to just put this video up just to kind of get people to think. Now, I realize that what I'm saying to some people sounds totally wacko, you're a loony and you don't know what you're talking about or whatever. But there were times in my life when I thought that I was probably a loony, and actually most of my life I've prayed and hoped and worked that what I saw never would come to pass. I don't want it to come to pass. I've never wanted it to come to pass. But since 9/11, I've watched things steadily sliding towards what my spiritual experiences have told me is going to come. And therefore, I feel like it's very important for me to raise a warning voice, to at least get people to think. I want people to think. I want people to think, what would I do if the system that I'm dependent on suddenly stopped supporting me? Do you have any food stored? Have you acquired any skills? Do you know how to can? Do you know how to garden? Do you know how to sew? Do you know how to build a shelter? Do you know how to take care of sanitation if your central plumbing isn't working? Do you know any of this stuff? Because people who have these skills, okay, are going to be very valuable. And I am not the kind of person who's just interested in looking at this and going, some kind of prepper survivalist that wants to sit there and hole up in some kind of shelter and try to fight off the whole world. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think we're going to need to pull together. Those of us who are good people, who are honest people, who are honorable people, we're going to need to pull together, and we're going to need to help each other, and we're going to have skills. And the reason why I've put together all of the programs I put together in training is not just because I want to teach people how to use commercial herbal products, even though I call my main website Modern Herbal Medicine because they're so widely available. I really want people to learn field botany. I want them to learn what I learned as a teenager, which is to understand that nature is very abundant and that there are lots of things that we can do that can help us with the sicknesses we face, with edible plants that could sustain us, even though it might be marginal. But just to be able to do this is important. I was recently down in LA, and just in the course of walking a couple of blocks with my son, I observed about 10 or 12 edible and medicinal plants growing in lawns and sidewalks and so forth. I mean, everywhere you go, there are things that nature provides that can help us. And this is one of my passions, and one of kind of my secret, if you want to call it a hidden agenda, in what I've been doing and teaching, is wanting to get people prepared. But if all a person knows how to do is, buy a commercial herbal product and doesn't even know how to identify any of the edible and medicinal plants in their, neighborhood or in their area, I don't think it's going to do much good to know about herbal medicine unless you actually know how to go and get the plants yourself. And so I'm making this video to encourage, since most of my followers are herbalists, to say now is the time to stop thinking just in terms of the commercial herbal preparations you're used to. Learn about how to get the plants from nature, because that knowledge may be essential, and you may be able to make a big difference in your neighborhood and your community if you have that knowledge. So, start looking at ways to get it. And thank you for watching.